So, the Sea Peoples have arrived. Total War Pharaoh receives the High Tide update, which delivers 2 new factions, 37 new units, a bunch of mechanics, plus other minor changes here and there under the hood, all for free. Well, it was supposed to be a paid DLC for Lord knows how much money, probably in the $18 to $25 range, until Pharaoh launched with an abysmal player count of 5,000 players. Now, I've had early access to the update for over a week to play as both the marauding Sheridan and the migrating Peliset to dive as deep as I possibly could into their new campaign mechanics and, of course, check out their Sea People's units. In today's video, I'll be talking about whether Pharaoh has been improved with the High Tides update, if the Sea People's factions make it worth buying for the newly lowered asking price of $40, and if it actually addresses any of the issues I raised in my official review of the game. So let's get started. Of all the directions Creative Assembly could have taken Pharaoh in their first content release, the Sea Peoples probably makes the most sense. We know little to nothing about them, so there's tons of creative liberty here, just up CA's alley. There are vague theories as to their origins, of course, where they may have settled or what cities they may have destroyed, but when it comes down to it really, we know nothing about them. Peliset, led by Walwates, are a nomadic tribe looking to settle in Canaan, essentially. They are a hybrid horde faction in that they get access to either or both horde and settled faction mechanics, and the Sheridan, led by Surfer Dude, are primarily a horde faction, raising and pillaging everything in their path. As horde factions, the idea is you are self-sustaining. You don't need to occupy cities to survive. In fact, you thrive on looting, pillaging, and razing cities to the ground, which fits nicely with what we know about the Sea Peoples. But right from the get-go, I have a huge problem. For all the mechanics and new features that the Sea Peoples comes with the High Tide update, they still have access to pretty much absolutely everything in the base game that they are trying to destroy and ruin. I can engage in diplomacy with a faction to trade food for gold, and then swiftly crush them, raising their settlements. Like, how does that make sense at all? I can join the Hittite or Egyptian courts. Like, why would the Sea Peoples join the courts of one of these cultures, the cultures they're trying to destroy? And I can choose to devote myself to one of their gods. I'm all for adding the Sea Peoples. This is something I've dreamt of playing in a Bronze Age game, but I don't understand why, apart from, replayability's sake, why you would want to do any of that as the menacing Bronze Age destroying Sea Peoples. Then the other glaring problem I noticed, which I mentioned in my official review, is that the Sea Peoples brought about the end of the Hittites, Canaanite city-states. It almost completely brought Egypt to its knees, and yet that's not really what you're doing here. If you want to destroy Egypt, first you need to wipe out Ramses, then Tausret, then Amen-Mes, and so on. An issue I have with the base game, this emphasis on specific people, the enduring immortal dozens of faction leaders who still don't have families or a succession system, and these people being the identities of the factions you fight is just a complete bore. As the Sea Peoples, it doesn't feel like you're destroying Bronze Age civilizations. It feels like you're killing individual annoying people. In terms of new campaign mechanics, we get War Spoils, which is literally just like asking Siri where the nearest 5-star restaurant is. Running out of gold, hey, War Spoils, where's the nearest major city with gold? Hey, War Spoils, where's the nearest city with an elite recruitment pool? It's not like all those things aren't there anyway, it's just you get a little button to click when you want to find out where the nearest one is. Like, I get that if you decide to be a settled faction, you get less and less rewards for raising cities, but this isn't new or innovative whatsoever. You either decide to settle or decide to be a horde. All this does is just slow the impact of switching from one to the other. There's also a new outpost. It would be weird if the Sea Peoples didn't have their own outpost system, and by all accounts, with how quickly you can recruit and bribe high quality units, you're definitely going to need some sort of regular, reliable discount to unit upkeep. But the outpost I least enjoy in Pharaoh is the fort, and the Nurahe Tower is basically a Sea People's fort, allowing you to station units in them for less upkeep, essentially. I hate the fort system. Seriously, the battles are straight out of Rome 2, the AI doesn't know how to fight them properly, and I just don't think it should be a fort. It would have been so much better as a supply dump. Raise and pillage and leave some of that as a province-wide upkeep bonus and bonus to other things in a supply cache you should try to protect. That way, rival factions are incentivized to destroy this outpost and deal a decent blow to your supply lines. But no, instead, we've got this silly tower. The tech tree is relatively different, and again, as with the rest of the tech trees, offers the players buffs to various stats depending on whether you want to be a horde or a settled faction or a mix of both. Nothing much to speak about here really, but finally we have new traditions, the Path of the Marauder and the Path of the Sea Peoples. The Sea Peoples is pretty standard. Depending on whether you want to be a horde or a settled faction, you place this little boat in various different parts of the grid to get bonuses. Build more horde armies to get better bonuses on that side, settle and build up your cities and outposts and get better bonuses on that side. There's really nothing else to it. While the Marauder path offers you new ways to engage in your battles. So, at the start of each battle, you can frighten them to reduce morale, bribe enemy units to switch sides and bring balance to the battlefield, dominate the populace, which rebels and gives you an entirely new army, and raise and exterminate, which is basically just a beefed up raise. I thought maybe by exterminating you stop other factions from resettling that settlement, which would be quite cool, but that's not the case. And then we have the battles and the 37 new units included in this free update. Honestly, the Sea Peoples, as they should be, are quite overpowered. You can steamroll entire factions on auto-resolve very early on in the game, and I mean, you can easily win battles in which you are heavily outnumbered. You can easily get access to high-tier units super quickly, and it's just not very challenging. And because they all look like cartoon cutouts of a Sea People's children's book, it just all comes across as incredibly shallow. The highlight, of course, of the new units added in this free update are the oxen cart chariots. Wow, a new type of essentially transport unit which swings around enemy lines, drops off individual soldiers, and charge at their flanks. Except they are totally and utterly bugged out, with most battles trying to use them ending up with the oxen carts running all over the map with zero control, and the units you dropped off getting absolutely obliterated because there's only a handful of them. Using the oxen carts to charge in doesn't help much either, since they're slower and get stuck more easily. So all in all, they're pretty damn useless. I was honestly really excited to trying this new unit out when I first heard about it. I actually think there's a lot of potential with this kind of unit, but as it is, it just kind of falls flat on its face, so hopefully CA does something about it in a patch or two. Overall, High Tide is a free update, and anything free is good, of course, especially if you're someone who already owns the game. But the content added here, the new factions, mechanics, and units don't do enough to make Total War Pharaoh worth buying. The Sea People's factions are a lazy, washed-out interpretation of the civilization-destroying menace they could have been. I mean, for God's sake, Iolaos has a campaign line where he says, "Let's have some fun." It couldn't be further from inducing fear. Their mechanics are just as the rest of the game boring and don't force you to make any difficult, risky decisions, and their units are nothing special and at times buggy. This is just more of the same. And what grinds my gears the most is the fact that as the Sea Peoples, you can do all of this and still engage in diplomacy to trade resources, or vassalize factions, or engage in non-aggression pacts, or follow their daily deities. It simply baffles me. For the Peliset, I can see it being justified as this faction is based on a more historical narrative of trying to find a new home, but for the Sheridan especially, engaging with everyone around you like they're any other faction, like you are any other faction, is just silly. You're a huge reason for the Bronze Age collapse. You are destroying their cities. You're bringing about the collapse of civilization. Knowing that, I don't imagine these factions would willingly want to hear you out diplomatically. It completely removes immersion for me. At the end of the day, the last time CA made a proper civilization-destroying horde faction menace was Attila Total War. The Sea People's factions are just not gritty enough, their mechanics are not interesting enough, and their units are just not different enough. High Tide just doesn't do enough and is honestly content CA probably finished off before the game released, so to make it a free update goes more in their favor of winning community goodwill than making a profit off of the hundreds of people still playing the game. Except they shouldn't win any goodwill. This is mediocre effort for a mediocre game. It doesn't write off anything. And that's it for today, guys. I've given High Tide a fair chance. I've tried the two new factions, their mechanics, their features, their units, and I honestly can say that this is just not worth it. I don't think it'll convince anyone to pick up the game, and I don't think it magically makes Pharaoh worth the current price of $40. Maybe with a hefty discount or from third-party retailers where you can pick it up for pretty cheap, but not for sticker price. CA has said they're planning on adding family trees, succession, mortality, and expanding the map in some way, maybe, but I'll believe it when I see it. I really hope you enjoyed this review of Total War Pharaoh's new update High Tide and found it informative. If you did, give it a like and drop any thoughts or questions in the comment section below. I'd love to hear what you think about everything I've discussed here today. Subscribe for more strategy and Total War content just like this, and thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.